children or adults that don't want to hear my sermon can go with you can wind up a little story and go back to the baptism. Alright, I'll keep it short. So I heard about this young storekeeper whose business was growing so much that he decided to relocate to a larger building. A friend of his called a florist and sent a wreath to celebrate said occasion. When the friend arrived at the grand opening, he was appalled to find that his wreath bore the inscription, "Rest in peace." He immediately called the florist to complain, who apologized profusely. But then the florist said, on the other hand, think about it this way. Somewhere in town today, a person is being buried under a wreath that says, "Good luck in your new location." It is the week after Easter. Last week we heard about the women coming to the tomb only to find that tomb gloriously empty. They had come with their spices, pounds and pounds of spices according to tradition, not just a few of those little miniature reforming bottles. But those fabulous figures in white dazzling clothes said to the women, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he is risen." Jesus was in a new location. He would never be found among the tomb of the dead again, but rather among the living, among you and among me. We call them resurrection appearances. Jesus appears to the disciples in the upper room. Later he's found on the road to Emmaus in the breaking of the bread, and my favorite, cooking breakfast for the disciples on the beach. He is not in the tomb, rather he is in life. And isn't that true of our faith? Typically, it is not the surprise of an empty tomb that transforms us, but a personal encounter with the risen Lord that leads to faith. As Frederick Wiener puts it, it is not Jesus' absence from an empty grave that convinces us. It is his presence in our empty lives. Jesus is in a new location between and around you and me and our neighbors. After Easter, you see, you can't go on living the same ordinary life. You can't go back to searching among the dead, because from now on you are looking for the living. God is God of the living, and the living change. The living surprise you. They don't stay put. They don't lay down in little tombs where you can keep them safely and always know where they are. The living change, they surprise you. And that is what Thomas does this morning. He surprises us with his doubt. He will not believe unless he sees for himself. He questions. He disbelieves. He's not satisfied with all these second-hand accounts. He wants to see for himself. And who can blame him, right? He was, after all, one who saw all that had just happened to his Lord. He had spent the last week or so trying to put all the pieces back together, trying to figure out what to do next. In fact, he might have already started getting on with his life. Why else, I wonder, is he out and about when the rest of the disciples are up in that upper room? Thomas does come to believe, though. He sees Jesus for himself. Jesus comes back to show himself to Thomas. And after that experience, he makes the most profound confession of faith, my Lord and my God. But all that comes after he has a chance to doubt. And Jesus lets him doubt. And sometimes faith is like that. It needs the freedom of questions and doubt to really spring forth and take hold. Otherwise, our faith might simply be confused with a repetition of all these creeds and rituals and showing up for church. But real, vigorous faith that is alive comes from the freedom to question and wonder and doubt. And Jesus is okay with that. We don't always have to know the answer or the way. Faith is often about being okay with not knowing. How did Jesus rise from the dead? Why does God come in 3 persons? How does heaven work? I don't know, but I can answer each of those questions with one word: God. I don't know the answer, but I believe God makes it happen and works it out. Miracles and grace and kindness and birth and death. I don't know how they happen except to say God. This morning we get to baptize a new baby and welcome him into the household of God. Gabriel Patrick Clewell is just a few months old. John and Sarah, you can no longer go on with your ordinary lives, as you've already figured out. Babies change. They surprise you. They don't stay put. They don't lay still, so you can keep them safely and always know where they are and always know what to expect. Babies change. They surprise you. We couldn't be happier to celebrate with you this day, but the journey thus far and the journey ahead are not easy. There will be times of parenthood that challenge you at the core. You will ask why in the middle of the night. He will come to you with why questions you cannot answer, and you will doubt. And sometimes the only thing you will be able to say is God, or oh God. It is a pretty good answer, so remember it. And remember, we are here today to be with you on this journey. By being here today, you have remembered God. Sometimes all we need to remember is this proof that we are on the right track, at least. Many of you may not know that John was in my very first youth group 15 years ago. There were many times during my almost 6 years of ministry with him, from 2001 to 7 at Memorial Church, that I asked God why I was doing this thing called ministry. And today, for the very first time, it comes full circle. John has married Sarah, who was baptized in this spot on October the 17th in 1988. And today I get to baptize Gabriel. And if my ministry were to end today, I would be all right. There were times when we worried, though, John, like when you were defending our country in Iraq. It was not easy for us. I remember one Saturday morning, especially October 28th, I realized it was this morning, 2006. I was trying to write a sermon on blind Bartimaeus in my office there. Blind Bartimaeus was the one who was begging on the side of the road, you may remember. I was there at the church that day because they were taking those stupid Olin Mills photo director pictures. Remember? It's my job to make coffee that day. I couldn't figure out what to preach, and then my phone rang. It said unknown number, and usually you let those go, but this one I answered. Hey, Stu, it's John. You were on the internet phone direct from Iraq, but it sounded like you were next door. I walked upstairs into the church because that was where it felt like I needed to be, and sat in that back pew. You seem to be doing pretty well, sleeping okay. For some reason, I wanted to know if you were carrying any weapons, as if I didn't know the answer. Oh yeah, he said, a pistol, 1,000 rounds of ammo, and grenades. Great, I thought, so why are you calling me? I don't want you to be there. I'd rather you be here. One of the young men in your group had been shot in the shoulder, I remember, lost the thumb, now back at Walter Reed. It had shaken up the whole unit. What can we do for you, John? I said. He wanted us to pray for him in all his plays. We can do that. A few minutes were about to be up, so we said our goodbyes, and I walked back to the parish hall where I needed a hug. Suddenly I had a sermon. I heard Jesus saying to Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do for you?" I remember getting angry about war and injustice and the pain in the world. I want to see, I said. I want my faith to be as strong as Bartimaeus or Thomas. But you aren't fixing things, God. People are still hurting. But you know, our faith doesn't fix things. Having faith doesn't take pain away. Jesus didn't come to fix us. Jesus came to save us, my friend. I think that's why we make those phone calls home that we make. Communion communities help us realize that in the midst of strife. When we are blinded by our surroundings or the darkness of night, we have to come back and touch and embrace our faith. So I dip my hands in this baptismal font every time I walk on it. It is my faith in that covenant that even in my dying days, I know that I will be raised to eternal life with you. It gives me sight. Glory sometimes, yes, but now I see. Our faith can give us sight to move through the challenges of life. Like Thomas and Bartimaeus, do not be afraid to ask, to see and touch the living God. You will find God. Perhaps on a tour to Iraq or a tour of our neighborhood. And once you do, you cannot stay the same. You have to go and tell, just as Jesus said to those first disciples. It makes it easier to stay under the covers in the darkness of doubt and not even ask the question, where there is little risk. But we have to get up and dust ourselves off and quit begging and start acting. There is work to do to free others to free. To keep coming back to our faith and community, to make room for those who are doubting, to help them, to help those who are still blind. You can't help but do that once you see or once you answer that phone call. The women went to the tomb with their spices and Jesus wasn't there. He had found a new location among the living. And when Thomas finds that news out and doubts, he questions, he wonders, and he joins him. It is not a bad place to be. Because Jesus says it is okay. He's got the open wounds to show us as if that is exactly what we need. He reaches out with his hands to welcome us and embrace us. And as soon as we're willing to let him, he shows us who he is in the living. And we too will find our faith and be able to proclaim him as our Lord and our God and find ourselves in a completely new location.